Hey, this is Ralph, and we're still working on our pay off the mortgage early calculator comparison project. So in a way, this could be a little bit easy here. In the previous video, which is definitely good to check out because that's when I focus on how to write the formulas here in order to keep up with the balance for your investment and keep up with the balance for the mortgage as that changes. I'm going to start off by copying all of this content. So I'm going to select all of this data, copy that, and let's make sure I drag it to the right spot. There we go. Oops. Control Z to undo. I'm going to put my cursor on the border of my selection, hold down my Control key, then click and drag, and that's more like a copy. Let go of my Control key. Didn't get my numbers exactly. We'll fix that up in just a second. I did notice down here, I was playing around at the end of the last video and showed a bunch of decimal places. So let me take those all the way back down. Okay. Now, if this data on the right matches the data on the left, we know everything is looking good. And I am a little bit off, so let's make sure we get that taken care of. For my investment, remember this is my investment up here. In fact, let me go ahead and change that to... And let's look at that first balance calculation. So we just got to fix a couple things here. Instead of G13, that's actually going to be that. K4 looks right, B14 looks right, G13 is wrong. Let's fix that up. That's going to be my original balance there. K4 is right. Cool. Let me just look at the second formula just to see how that looks. L4 plus K5, L4 plus K5. Cool. And now if we scroll down, I can see my investment balance, 394,635, 394,635. We're golden. All right, now for the house mortgage, let's make sure the numbers there look right. G8, that's not correct. That needs to be B8. G8 needs to be B8. B11, that's right, divided by 12, M4 payment, yep, that looks good. And let's double check the second one, N4, previous balance times N4, B11, absolute, looks good, M5, payment, perfect. And so now this should be matched up. There we go. Okay, so now we have two equal displays of our investments and our mortgage. Now we can start to do some experiments, and you can, hopefully you're creating this spreadsheet for yourself so that you can also experiment with me. Now let's go ahead and play with some of these numbers, and if we write our formulas right, we should be able to change this data around. So if my mortgage payment was $1,500, obviously that recalculates the balance, and the balances get redisplayed up here. Quick check, I should still be zeroing out at the end of that 10 years. Looks good. If my starting investment balance was not 100,000, maybe it's 200,000. That affects those equally, and everything looks matched up. Great. Monthly investment, maybe monthly investment is only 500. Everything else gets updated as it should. Now here's where we can start to do our first comparison. With the pay mortgage early, I'm looking at my mortgage balance, and what if instead of making this $1,500 payment, what if we pay it all off right here in this second month? So I'm going to make this payment equal to the previous balance, and then it's going to start to zero out. Actually, we forget there's some interest charges on there, so I'll fix that up in just a second. And the rest of these can all be 0, and I'll just autofill that down. So really this needs to be equal to that plus 480. Okay, so we've paid off our house early. However, where did we get that 150 grand to pay off that house early? Well, maybe it came from our investment. So I'm going to go ahead and reduce this by 148,000. So I'll just do a little quick math here. We'll just do equals 204,000 minus 148,000. Still an estimate, but a pretty close estimate. that drops our investment down to 56 grand. So what does that really mean? Well, we no longer have a $1,500 mortgage payment, which means starting in this next month, actually maybe starting in this still the second month, we can increase this payment. Instead of $500 a month going into investments, it's going to be $2,000 going into investments. And then I'll do an equals the previous, click on that third one there, autofill it down. And now we can start to see what our scenario happens to be. Now, if we keep the mortgage, if we keep paying our $1,500 a month towards that mortgage, that means we only have $500 a month to put into investments. And we end up with an investment account of $644,000 after 10 years, and we've paid off our mortgage. But check this out. We'll ignore these little ones and the small numbers in here, it's just for my rounding. If we pay that mortgage off early, we don't have to make those mortgage payments and we get to increase our investment. However, we're losing out on that interest, that return on that big number. Obviously, it's better to get 10% interest on $200,000 than it is to get 10% interest on $56,000. So what does that really do for us? Well, at the end of the 10 years, our investment account is only $551,000 compared to the $644,000. So what does this tell us? Well, basically this is saying that based on our numbers, it is better to keep that mortgage, steadily put in that smaller amount into the investment account and build it up over time. What could make this information change? Well, if our investment return was smaller, closer to, let's say, 5%, and if our mortgage rate was higher, also 5%, now we're going to start to see that the differences are not so dramatic. And it's actually still better to keep the investment, keep the mortgage, but you'll notice the difference is, what, less than 10 grand. So the higher the return on the investment and the lower the mortgage indicates that keeping the mortgage is the better deal. This isn't factoring in everything though, right? It's not factoring risk. It's not factoring in the fact that sometimes the markets are going to return 5% or less or negative. It's also not returning in just the good feeling of security a person gets from paying off that mortgage and dramatically reducing their monthly living expenses. It feels good to have a paid off house, even though you might take a financial hit over 10 years, over 20 years, it's probably even smaller and less noticeable. How much are you willing to pay for that good feeling? So once again, if my mortgage rate is, let's say 4%, my investment returns are 11%, paying off that mortgage early over 10 years looks like it's going to cost me over 100 grand, okay? Over 110 grand, assuming, of course, everything stays the same with investments. So once you create your own calculator, and I definitely want you to do that, start to run through numbers. Have an option where you're keeping your mortgage just as it is. This is kind of like your control group. And then you create a separate calculator where you can run through various scenarios in order to pay it off earlier and see which one makes sense. If you're just looking at the numbers, if you're just looking at finances, it's probably almost going to make sense to keep that mortgage as long as possible. However, for you and your family, don't forget to factor in some of those non-monetary benefits of getting rid of the huge chunk of debt and stuff like that. You could also redo this calculator where you're not making one big chunky payment to pay off the mortgage early, but maybe you're making a series of monthly payments that are higher than normal to pay that mortgage off early. So have fun with this. Be creative with it and style it a little bit nicer than I styled mine here. And then start to run through your own scenarios that make sense for you. Thanks for hanging out with me.